I know from having been on the White House Pentagon level behind the scenes of the New World Order effort that there is a very deliberate plan, to make all of us feel totally helpless to the point where we'll say, come on, New World Order, save us all. When they reveal the technology that they have that is so alien to all of us, bear in mind that they are that far advanced ahead of us, and consider other perceptions, consider other angles, consider that they could be manipulating our minds, consider that this might not be alien after all. I am not saying that there's no such thing as aliens. I'm not saying that at all. Matter of fact, I'd like to believe there's some more intelligent life out there somewhere. But nevertheless, the fact remains that we need to separate the deliberate government misinformation from what's real so that we can determine what is real in extraterrestrial intelligence. J. Bennett Johnston certainly convinced me at that point in time. And I felt totally helpless. And he programmed me to carry out my first operation. He actually took me to a military base in Oklahoma, Tinker Air Force Base, where I was programmed through sophisticated means to carry out my first trial run operation. At that time, when the planes would take the mercenaries down into South America, J. Bennett Johnston did not believe that they should come back empty, and these planes came back full of cocaine. It was my experience that the CIA's so-called war on drugs is no more than the CIA eliminating their competition as they took over the drug industry worldwide. The CIA's war on drugs is being waged on our street corners, not only in the United States, but in Canada and on a global scale. It's turned our streets into a bloodbath because of this enormous excess of drugs that's been brought into our countries. I certainly would not have distributed any drugs had I had any control over my own mind and had my own free will. But at the time I was totally robotic, and I carried out the instructions to take a large quantity of cocaine and deliver it into the neighboring state of Arkansas to a remote airport in Ouachita Forest that I've since identified as Mena Airport. In 1978, Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas. Bill Clinton's cocaine operation was already in full swing and was being used as a funding mechanism for the New World Order controls. He was part of the Order of the Rose. He was a part of this ongoing New World Order effort, and he had already established enormous drug routes at that time. I also delivered a personal stash of cocaine to Bill Clinton, along with a message and a packet of information. I watched Bill Clinton cut up 2 lines of the cocaine, and he did inhale. He snorted the cocaine. That wasn't the first time I saw Bill. That was the first time I saw Bill Clinton using cocaine, but it certainly wasn't the last. I saw him using it repeatedly throughout my victimization, right up until 1988 when Mark rescued Kelly and I. My exposure to Bill Clinton was limited pretty much to the drug industry. My sexual experience with him was extremely limited because my experience was that I have witnessed Bill Clinton involved in homosexual activity. It is my experience that Bill Clinton, like Hillary Clinton, is bisexual, leaning far more towards a homosexual end. It's Hillary Clinton that accessed my sex programming to fulfill her perversions. Hillary Clinton is very much aware of New World Order efforts and is very much a part of Order of the Rose operations. By 1980, my daughter Kelly was born. And as quickly as she was born, Senator Byrd ordered that we be transferred back to Nashville, Tennessee, where we were under the control of my second mind control handler, Alex Houston. Alex Houston is a ventriloquist, stage hypnotist in the country music industry. Houston is the criminal that Mark referred to on how he met me, because up until 1988, I was under the control of Alex Houston. As my handler, Alex Houston followed Senator Byrd's directions to ensure that I was in the designated places at specific times so that I would be used to carry out these various criminal covert operations. He also took me to the military and NASA installations for mind control programming, as Senator Byrd instructed. Kelly was exposed to sophisticated NASA mind control technology from birth. Her victimization was far more high-tech than mine was, and it's going to take the same high-tech mechanisms to give her full access to her brain again and give her control over her own mind. But the government doesn't want to release this information. If they were to release the antidote for mind control, they would have to admit that it exists. And they don't want to admit that mind control exists because they're wanting to manipulate us all by it. Was a vehicle by which I know and was unfortunately forced to participate in bringing drugs over the border into Canada, which I find deeply disturbing. And again, from my experience, I didn't know that there was a border between our countries, because we were allowed to freely cross the borders with the drugs during the Reagan-Bush administration. In 1984, I had heard Bill Clinton and George Bush discussing how when the American population became disillusioned with Republicans leading them into the New World Order, that Bill Clinton, as a Democrat, would be put into place. He had earned his way into a high position of influence because of the cocaine route that he was running, because of his influence in the New World Order, Order of the Rose controls. It was my experience that Bill Clinton answered to George Bush, as did many other world leaders, not robotically, not under mind control, but because of George Bush's extreme intelligence and inside knowledge of exactly what it would take to bring about this world dominance effort. It was my experience that George Bush has run our country through 3 administrations. Ronald Reagan's, his own, and Bill Clinton's. George Bush's influence has been very heavy and very strong and powerful. He began with the United Nations. His career began with the United Nations. Then he went on to head our CIA. He went on into the political end and became vice president and president, with his allegiances remaining to the United Nations and the New World Order controls. Back at that same time, it was discussed how the groundwork for NAFTA was being laid, and I was forced to participate in this groundwork, all of which is detailed in our book, Transformation of America. The groundwork for NAFTA was rooted in criminal, corrupt activities. It had been determined back in 1984 that George Bush, who was vice president at that time, would become president, which certainly makes me wonder, what are elections all about? It was already determined. It was also determined at that time, the president of Mexico was President de la Madrid, who I was exposed to repeatedly. And under him was Vice President Salinas, who I was also exposed to. It was my experience during those years that Salinas was actually in control of Mexico, the same way that Bush was in control of the United States. And Salinas, too, respected George Bush's leadership. And it had been determined that when George Bush came into the office of President of the United States, that Salinas would go into the office of President of Mexico. And they would then implement NAFTA, which is exactly what happened. But we needed the Canadian aspect in there. That had already been established. I was exposed to Brian Mulroney on several occasions and was well aware of his involvement and participation in the Order of the Rose. Just like Pierre Trudeau, he too was involved in it. That's not to say that whatever little political details that you all were exposed to through the media and that happened were the same, because there are differences through different politicians and different administrations. But nevertheless, it all comes towards the same goal. It all went to New World Order controls because ultimately Pierre Trudeau and Brian Mulroney's ultimate goal was exactly the same. I was exposed to Brian Mulroney during a White House cocktail party when Senator Byrd was acting in the capacity of a pimp as usual and prostituting me to then President Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, in turn, had encouraged Brian Mulroney to utilize my sexual programming along with several other mind-controlled slaves. It was my experience that Brian Mulroney's perversion was a perversion of power. It was a perversion of using various mind-controlled slaves, and he liked more than one. One other mind-controlled slave that I was prostituted to him to had known him and been prostituted repeatedly. He was one of her primary abusers. She's Arlen Specter's mind-controlled slave. Senator Arlen Specter is very influential in the United States. He's very powerful. And she was his mind-controlled slave. And she was prostituted to Brian Mulroney repeatedly, and she and I were prostituted together to him because we had been programmed together. We had been what's called mirror programmed, where we would act in unison to together fulfill the perversion of, at that time, Brian Mulroney. Most disturbing thing that happened was this cocktail party that was honoring him as the guest at the time had provided me the latitude of hearing a conversation between he and Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan said at that time that he believed the only way to world peace was through mind control of the masses. The far-reaching ramifications of this statement are very apparent to me from having been under mind control. I wonder at a world peace where there's no free thought. Because without free thought, there's no free will, and without free will, there's no soul expression. So how can we have world peace where there's no soul expression and people don't have any peace of mind? I firmly believe that world peace is going to be a natural occurrence when people realize their soul connection. When they have the kind of spirituality that gives them that inner peace. Because when they have inner peace, that's when I believe we'll have world peace. I certainly don't believe that we're going to have world peace through controlling people and turning them into robots the way that Ronald Reagan believed. I believe that each and every one of us needs to realize that spiritual connection and have that soul strength in order to deal with the realities that we're all having to face today. These are very difficult times on a global scale. And the truth that is finally coming forth is not always pretty. I think people have an idea that truth is supposed to be some kind of flowery, pretty thing that's just some kind of wonderful something, when in fact, it doesn't have anything to do with truth. As my friend Wes Mann said earlier today, truth just is. And the truth that we're all having to deal with is that we're going to have to evolve with the knowledge of mind control in order to protect ourselves against it. We have got to maintain our free thought in order to take back our respective countries and restore the kind of moralities and freedoms that we've been used to. Justice has been eroded, particularly in the United States, and needs to be reestablished. When good people take control of the government once again, then we can realize all the positive benefits of the information that they've been manipulating all of us by. The positive benefits are certainly enormous, which is why they're keeping them secret. It's absolutely inexcusable that this small handful of criminals, and that's all it is a small handful of criminals, that they're allowed to continue to run our world into this world dominance effort. We, as spiritual, good people, need to gather the strength and the fortitude to be able to stand up to these criminals and get them out of office, to get them out of power, and to allow truth to prevail. This is a time for truth to prevail. It's a time for the information to be used for the betterment of humanity and for the evolvement of all of us, the spiritual evolvement of us all. The criminal activities that I was forced to participate in, particularly as pertains to NAFTA, particularly as pertains to the drug industry that has so adversely affected so many people in society. The deliberate erosion of justice that has allowed for pedophile perversions to proliferate for mind control purposes. The perversions that I was forced to fulfill. And knowing that my daughter was being used likewise was absolutely horrible and is detailed in Transformation of America. Because you have a right to these details. You have a right to know what the plan is. You have a right to know who each and every one of these criminals are. When Mark rescued Kelly and I in 1988, I couldn't think to escape. I didn't have that capacity any more than I had the capacity to think to protect my daughter. Under MK Ultra mind control, I was manipulated by my maternal instincts. I was manipulated by my religion. I was manipulated by my patriotism and my love for humanity as a whole. These are deep-reaching, and they certainly were effective for robotic mind control. I'm extremely fortunate that Mark came along when he did and rescued us. He rescued me from certain death. I was 30 years old, which they considered too old. They considered 30 too old for fulfilling sexual perversions. And not only that, but at age 30, there's certain electrochemical changes that occur in our brains that make a difference for so many people, that they didn't want to take a chance on any secrets being revealed that I had been exposed to, particularly as pertained to NAFTA. And therefore, I was to be killed in a snuff film. This was to fulfill perversions, which there's an enormous market for, unfortunately. I know that's beyond our realm of comprehension and ability to think of, but there are people who are so perverse that they enjoy snuff films where a person is actually killed. The fate for my daughter was going to be far worse. This video evidence of my death was also going to be used to ensure government leaders that the secrets were gone with me. But they never counted on what would happen when a good man like Mark Phillips gained knowledge of mind control. They never considered how it could be used for good. They never considered how it could be used to restore a mind rather than control one. And Mark came in just at the right time to intercept me en route to my death and Kelly's horrible fate. And he took us to the safety and serenity of Alaska, where I began to remember those things I was supposed to forget. When Mark came along, I certainly didn't have a capacity to trust. I didn't know how to trust. Yet, when he rescued us right out from under the noses of the CIA, he took the time to rescue our farm animals, because Kelly and I were being maintained on a 100-acre farm where we had dogs and cats, guineas, chickens, horses, and cows, all of which Kelly and I loved dearly. We loved our animals. But it's my experience that criminals who abuse children abuse animals, and people who abuse animals abuse children. It's some kind of disrespect for life that seems to go hand in hand. Everybody I knew abused animals. And yet Mark took the time to come in and rescue our animals. Additionally, he had pets that he had rescued. He had pet raccoons, and he had a dog, and they all loved him. The coons would actually hug him and wrap their arms around him, and I'd never seen animals that could trust. And even though I couldn't think to rationalize all of this out, I had this sense, this animal instinct myself that let me know that if the animals could trust him, I could too. This had a profound effect on Kelly as well. With Mark's loving expertise, I began remembering. And as quickly as I began remembering, which is certainly I'll go into much, much more detail tomorrow during our workshop on exactly how the memory recovery happens and what happens in the brain and what the positive benefits are. But I began writing out my memories in photographic detail. And as fast as these memories were validated by the clean, supportive members of law enforcement and the intelligence community, not only in the United States but in Canada as well, had a profound impact on our situation, as a matter of fact. As quickly it was validated, it was disseminated and scattered everywhere, so that those criminals couldn't stop the truth. They never thought, they never dreamed that I would ever recover. They never considered the strength of the human spirit, and therefore we had just enough time for me to remember these events and disseminate them. Now silencing us is not going to stop the truth. The truth is already out. Kelly was not as fortunate as I was, because as quickly as she began having memory flashes of what had happened to her during the Reagan-Bush administration and how she was used to fulfill political perversions, she went into respiratory failure and was hospitalized at Humana Hospital in Anchorage, Alaska. She was not responding to conventional medications, but she did respond to therapeutic intervention. At that time, we were working diligently to get Kelly the high-tech help that she would need for deprogramming, because the methods that were used to deprogram me did not apply to Kelly. And at that time, through a series of events of which Senator Byrd was involved with his political influence, Kelly was thrust into the immoral and illegal custody of the state of Tennessee. Kelly remains a political prisoner today, institutionalized and denied any rehabilitation for the proven MK-Ultra mind control abuses she endured. Kelly had experienced love, though, and love is the greatest healer of all. Because of that love, because Kelly is not being hurt at this time, she was able to regain some free thought. And Kelly knows exactly who and what Mark and I are up against in our effort to get this information out. And she is waiting patiently and impatiently for people to wake up to the reality of mind control, so that no other children will be victimized, and so that she can receive the qualified rehabilitation that she deserves. Kelly knows, like Mark and I know, that knowledge is our only defense against mind control. It is truth that sets us free. Please, Help us spread the word. Help us get this information out. Despite our controlled medias, despite the suppression of this information, people, good people like yourselves, are taking the information and disseminating it among their friends and among their loved ones and among people in political positions to make a difference. And I encourage each and every one of you, please, we need you to help us spread the word. Thank you.
We're going to have an auction, actually just a draw for the one of Cathy and Mark's book, and then we're going to have a short break. So I'll have Cathy draw this.
During the break, folks, please, if you have any written questions, pass them to Wes. He'll be going around up and down the aisles and mingling amongst you. And those of you who need to excuse yourselves, you all have been sitting very patiently for some time now. We would like to answer as many questions as humanly possible, as long as they're within the realm of our topic. There's a lot of information I get every day because of all the thousands and literally millions of people that are waking up worldwide. We're inundated with information, and a lot of it goes unnoticed until people begin to wonder if I'm under mind control. But the information that we can supply you with some comfort, knowing that it's accurate, is stuff on mind control. There's an opportunity that's going to prevail. I met this man in Washington, D.C. By the name of Len Horowitz. He's a dentist that became a whistleblower. And he's real interested in some of the research involved in the emerging viruses that seem to be coming out of nowhere. Green monkey stuff and all that kind of thing. Ebola and, of course, AIDS. Len Horowitz is not on the nut fringe. He was a very successful oral surgeon and dentist. I met him and his family, and I was very impressed. He has a book that is extraordinarily well documented. And Len Horowitz, unlike Cathy, was not affected by this stuff. He just feels compelled, like we do, and any other whistleblower, to get this information out. And at tremendous economic sacrifice to himself and his family. They're very supportive, and I'm very supportive of Len Horowitz. And I know that each of you will find his information extremely applicable to some of the questions that you've had about this thinning out of the world's population. A Tennessean by the name of, I won't say his name, I don't even like to. He happens to be Vice President of the United States when he attended the UN conference on population control. Some of his suggestions validated Len Horowitz's book on emerging viruses. One last announcement before we break. Tomorrow night we're going to be talking about mind control. We're going to be covering all aspects of it, how you can recognize and identify it, and it's going to be an interactive workshop. We normally limit these workshops to about 70 people because we want everybody to get the answers that they are anxious to find out about, particularly the areas of interest. And a lot of people are interested in things like subliminal advertising and marketing, and others are interested in the electronic aspect of mind control, what's out there technologically, what's real, what's actually being fed to us to maintain us in some sort of a fear mode, because as our dear friend David Icke told you, fear is their #1 psychological warfare weapon. It is fear that is keeping this room from being absolutely packed. Now, we have gone into some areas where people, where there's large pods or networks of people where we'll have thousands of folks to talk to. But I'll tell you right now that the vast majority of them are suffering from that controlling factor known as fear. Here's a four-letter word that begins with F that I don't like. And it's one that if it ever got a hold of Cathy or I, we could not do what we're doing. But tomorrow night, we want to talk about everything there is to know that we have, that we can document clinically, as well as through Freedom of Information Act stuff, as well as what the research that has emerged in the past 8 years through diligent efforts on the behalf of good psychiatrists and good psychologists. And we want to share that information with you, and we want to answer all your questions and dispel some of this fear, because as dreadful as this information is, it does have some extraordinary relief valves. So in the meantime, let's take a break, and we'll be back there signing a book or two for you, for those of you who don't need to go use the facilities, and see you back in about, say 25 minutes. Thanks. Oh, okay. We got, well, let me do it. Don't, the name Claire Earl. Come get your free book, whoever you are. You want it. Fair and square.
I guess I just didn't understand.
Now listen, if you all have any more questions, just keep passing them towards that man right there. Cathy and I work in mental health and law enforcement. Mental health, particularly in the field of psychiatry, are the most educated people in terms of years dedicated on the face of this earth. I don't know how many psychiatrists we have in the room tonight, but this is no insult to you. You're part of the youngest of all the healing arts, and you're probably the most contained as far as information goes, particularly as pertains to memory. Questions that we received from psychiatrists were juvenile, or shall we say, very uninformed compared to those of the average citizen, because you folks have been brainwashed. You understand the logic behind how the mind works. Most people understand that our brains work like computers, which is how the concept of computers came into reality. We're going to answer as many questions as we can. We've got a few of them here, and again, I want to thank Westman and the Preferred Network, who has dedicated his life and his resources to making sure that folks like yourselves and other folks associated with you, your loved ones, whether they like the information you're imparting to them or not, are getting at least some remnants of actually what's going on behind the scenes that's controlling all of us. Some of these questions I may have difficulty. The first one I looked at, does HAARP have anything to do with mind control? HAARP is part of what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. I am not an expert on HAARP. I have toured with Dr. Nick Begich, who is. Dr. Nick Begich is a physicist who is a very brilliant man. I knew his father very briefly. His father died in a tragic accident in Alaska. His body was supposedly never found. That too is a bunch of bunk. It was found by some Civil Air Patrol folks that I know that worked for the FAA, and it was all covered up for reasons of national security. He was killed with a fellow who was involved in the oil company out of Louisiana, Congressman or U.S. Senator there. Nick Begich is a whistleblower, and I'll tell you what, he is one of those brave folks that I have a lot of respect for. HAARP is a book that I strongly suggest you read. It involves weather modification. It involves the Van Allen belts, actually, around the Earth, that circle the Earth. is tapping into it as an energy source and as a source of control of certain types of frequencies that affect our brain stems. And HAARP, even though it's in the infantile stages at this point, is being developed at a very rapid rate. Soviets, at that time, I know that way, I've got brainwashed. The Russians were particularly interested in this stuff in the 50s and 60s, and actually had it going to some degree very effectively. Obviously, it's not that effective yet. The system that is based out of Anchorage, or just out north of Anchorage, Alaska, which I've got pictures of, and which we've actually seen, is a good example of what I believe is going to be emerging in the future as a possibility of, again, some knowledge that can be used for extraordinary good or extraordinary evil. It depends on who's running it. So HAARP is also under the MK Ultra umbrella. That should answer the question, does it have anything to do with mind control? Back to that one. Let's skip that one for a minute. What can you tell us about Heaven's Gate cult and so-called suicide? I'll tell you some interesting facts. We've been on the road, so naturally I lose out on a lot of stuff, but one of my friends, a Reverend Rick Strawcutter, who's one of those incredible Christian ministers who is not concerned with controlling people, but explaining to them what's controlling them, and not using religion to show them what to think, but instead give them an honest access to their spirituality and discovering their spirituality. Reverend Strawcutter is a buddy of mine. He got a packet from Heaven's Gate. You know why he got it? Because he's one of the most successful book distributors of this kind of information in the world. And they were setting up on him. Strawcutter is very brilliant. He took the information directly to his lawyer. Together they went down to the FBI building and said, "It smells like setup. Don't include us." Reverend Strawcutter made front pages of most of the newspapers in Lower 48, and he also made national news as being a right-wing, this, that, and the other. I mean, they labeled this poor guy with every conceivable label you can imagine. Bottom line was the sales went up, thank God. But he's a book distributor. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Heaven's Gate before Cathy interrupted me. The founder of Heaven's Gate came from a little area just outside of the town of Indianapolis, Indiana. Oh, by the way, same place where one of our former vice presidents came from, who was very literal and couldn't spell potato. In addition to that, there was another guy that you might remember the name, Jim Jones. He too came from that area, along with some 70-odd other cult leaders that have come and gone, also emerged out of that area. It is also well known within the CIA circles that this was an area of concentrated research because of some religious belief systems and because of the cooperation of local officials that began in earnest in the late 1960s. By the mid-1970s, they had pretty much done all they were going to do. The New York Times reported in 1971 that they had a confidential informant that was willing to testify before Congress that the Central Intelligence Agency had hired a number of people to infiltrate none other than satanic cults and really occultic groups that were utilizing blood rituals, human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, and other horrific forms of torture to affect the minds of the onlookers. The CIA was extremely interested in what it did to those people that witnessed these hideous acts of human depravity. Now, that article asked the question is, why is the CIA interested in infiltrating these kinds of cults? The suicides, the mass suicides, of the Heaven's Gate people seem to have coincided with something that has only recently emerged. As many of you know, one of the members of actually the person second in command of Heaven's Gate, very brilliant fellow, was the brother of a very famous black actress on the Star Trek series. This woman is now the spokesman for NASA, and she is the spokesman for a project that NASA is offering to all of us in here, that we can have our ashes put in a capsule and put in orbit. They just sent off a missile 7 days ago, and this missile put into orbit some 4,500 different folks in these little capsules. One was Timothy Leary, who said he wanted to have the ultimate trip. I can understand that. I also think that there was also some of the Heaven's Gate people that apparently were a little slow and couldn't catch up with Tail Bob riding the tail. And so they wanted their ashes put into orbit. Well, their ashes ain't going to stay in orbit because they're going to come floating down and burn up like so much other debris in about 10 years. The bottom line is, why has NASA suddenly got into the funeral directing business? And why did this Heaven's Gate thing come along just at the right time? You know, nothing in politics happens by accident. Nothing. Remember that statement. Nothing is by accident. And this Heaven's Gate thing opened up a whole lot of questions. But one of the questions that was answered to me was, I printed out, close to 100-page manifesto that was on the internet that Heaven's Gate had on their webpage. The repetitious statement made by the leader was, aside from cutie things like, you know, you got to get castrated if you're a male, that was real exciting, was the fact that no one was allowed to think. Thinking was forbidden. Okay? Most people, when they say, well, I think I might want to do that. I had fellows that I worked with at NASA that forbid me to say the word think. They said, you either say you're going to do it or you want to do it, but don't say you think you're going to want to do it. Well, in an NLP, what that means is you're undecided. And under mind control, you don't have the ability to be undecided because your decisions are being made for you. So the underlying current in this manifesto that was released by the Heaven's Gate folks shows a definite correlation that these people were under some sort of horrific, sophisticated mind control. Now, these were not stupid people. Most people think that people that join cults are people who are antisocial or can't get along in society, and they just need a place to belong. This may be true in some Christian subcults. This is not true in the type of cults that Heaven's Gate was. Heaven's Gate, I believe, was nothing more than just a Jonestown in miniature that was used for a variety of reasons. Uncle Sam never does anything for a singular cause. But I just wanted to point out a few of these little oddities that are emerging, like where these leaders are coming from and where some of this stuff is happening. We've been invited to speak in Indianapolis, and we've been invited to speak in the very area, as a matter of fact, 2 blocks down the street from where Jim Jones's first church was.
Are you familiar with the Franklin affair? The Franklin cover-up is a case that parallels our case and involves mind control and some of the same victimizers that my daughter and I were subjected to, namely George Bush and Alex Houston. Paul Bonacci, the victim of mind control in the Franklin case, has named Alex Houston as an abuser, and Alex Houston had a key to Boys Town where Paul Bonacci had been abused and under mind control, because Alex Houston went there routinely to indulge in as pedophile perversion as well as manipulate the minds of the traumatized children. The Franklin case is one, we've got a little a book available that's called The Carefully Crafted Hoax, with a foreword by the former FBI agent Ted Gunderson, who's well respected down in the States.
So, by the way, I'm going to try to weasel him up here to speak to you all.
He's
Ted
got a lot of
Gunderson was at
information.
one time third in command of the FBI. He's very articulate. He looks like a Fed, and he talks like a Fed, but he is a spiritual being who is a human being and a great person.
He's a good man. But we've got the Carefully Crafted Hoax, which is a very rare book anywhere these days since the Franklin cover-up. The book version is now out. But the Carefully Crafted Hoax is an outline, step by step, of what happened to these children and how the cover-up was perpetuated. The book is available through Wes Mann's preferred network in a very limited number and through very limited editions, but nevertheless it's available and more information is available there.
Yeah, I will link. There's a psychologist who works with her husband, psychiatrist, I believe. She goes by the name of Denson Gerber. Her husband was the guy that evaluated Oswald and for the Warren Commission, who said that he was not a mind control person, that he would acted alone, and somehow was the most incredible shot with the most incredibly magic bullets that ever have been on the face of the earth. Denson Gerber was also the one that was court appointed to represent the poor plaintiffs in the case in Nebraska. It's called the Franklin cover-up. When I was brought into the case, and the FBI invited me to come in because their intelligence connection dropped off at a certain point. I was brought in to find out why the case was crumbling underneath them. Well, Denson Gerber was my number one focus, and I said, do you know who she is? Well, after they looked at that, that was a real surprise and an eye-opener, but unfortunately it was too late. She'd already done her damage. And then the other witnesses that were being brought forth were actually in another state, in the state of California, also involved another case mirroring that case, which is called the Presidio case. And the Denson Gerber and all that group had hired an attorney to represent them. And guess what? It's the same attorney that Jim Jones used to set up Jonestown. So, I mean, containment, the CIA can fool the best of them. The attorney that was involved in all of this, John DeCamp, who was representing all these plaintiffs. John brought me in his office and he said, all right, he said, so the government sent in the folks on us to cover up the case on the psychological end, and then we got our witnesses thing contaminated. And I said, yeah, and I said, you're getting it from another end, from a group called the LaRouches, who put out just nothing but truth about George Bush. But they have somehow, Lyndon LaRouche has managed to miraculously separate criminals according to political affiliation. I don't know how he does it. It defies all logic. The LaRouches wanted to support us until I said, until you can explain how in the world you can separate George Bush and Bill Clinton in their drug operations, I'm only interested in talking about your operation as being a part of the problem. But Denson Gerber, most recently, thank you, has been brought in as the expert testimony on Patsy Ramsey, the mother of Jean-Benet Ramsey. So I can tell you right now, I'm very sorry to say that Patsy Ramsey, the mother, has got a most unfortunate name. She is fixing to be another McVeigh, Oswald, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I don't know what her level of involvement was, but I've got a funny feeling, and you heard it right here, that she is going to take a serious fall on all of this. She was from West Virginia. She was a beauty queen, and her statements that she has made have been consistent with someone who has either undergone a severe nervous breakdown, which she legitimately should be entitled to, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or mind control.
This kind goes
Okay. What's Elizabeth Loftus? Maggie Brush, Stephen Season's connection. Wow, I can't answer that. I don't know. Elizabeth, I really can't answer that question. I probably can answer that question if whoever wrote it to me is willing to look in the back of the book and write it to me, then I can punch it up and give you that information. I'm sorry. That's a very important question, but I really can't get into it other than to tell you that Elizabeth Loftus is an adversary of ours. We have a federal election coming up in Canada. What do you know about the current Canadian political leaders, especially Christianity? Well, I'm working on my imitation, but other than that, I don't know much about it. Someone says, I've been told he's a homosexual. Is this true? Thank God I can't tell you. But he did go down to see his good friend Bill Clinton, and they went out and played golf, and you know something about golf, they have to wash those things they play with. And oh, gee willikers, I don't know. I don't, right now, there's not a heck of a lot of these world leaders that I do trust. I am seeing some enormous changes on lower levels, but this prime minister presidential omnipotent level, I'm not seeing too many changes other than the fact that they're taking a lot of heat from a lot of folks. But a new set of world economic regulations are being formulated in Europe that will allow the foreign takeover and domination of all Canadian institutions. I'll tell you what I think of this. I think it just plain sucks. I'm sorry about my language. But Canadians have one thing that other governments don't have. Like you guys own your own bank. You own your own bank until Pierre Trudeau got a hold of you. You didn't owe any money. Now, I'm very sorry for y'all because what's happening here is the Canadians are, for a good example, the price you pay in gasoline, you guys are floating on a pool of gasoline, in essence, of oil over in Alberta. You ran out all the oil companies that were exploiting that because you're going to be bringing the price of fuel down worldwide. Plus the fact that you guys in Canada weren't going to be paying much more than about 15 cents a liter for it. And now I see the signs 58, 60, 61. That equates in my mind, the best I can, is about 2.5 times the price that you pay just south of here. With a small population and the natural resources this country's got, you folks are getting molested worse than any country I know of. I don't usually get questions I can't answer about something when it comes to video stuff. Our question is a total audio video tactile retrain on a cognitive basis, precursor or to recall.
precursor to recall. In other words, the audio video tactile retraining the brain of the cognitive things is a precursor to recall.
The answer to that question is yes. And tomorrow I've got a different way of expressing it, but the answer to that question is yes. How do you know when your subconscious is being targeted by certain commercials, particularly perfume ads, automobile ads, and ads to induce you into running out and joining the military? Boy, I don't see anybody in here that want to do that. But there are ways of seeing it, and once you see how it's done, it's pretty clever. I think, you're hearing this right here, I think that every school in the world should teach neurolinguistics. In other words, the language of the unconscious, the language of the subconscious. I think it's inexcusable that this has been a hidden science just so that a handful of capitalists like myself can make a living off of you. I think it's inexcusable that it's not taught in schools, that we have the capacity to think on two separate levels. So, now here's a question that I don't have a clue about, and whoever wrote it, I hope to goodness they're going to be at the meeting tomorrow. Is there a connection to tonight's subject and the 13 Graymen? I don't know who the 13 Graymen were. I don't know, it's alien to me.
Could you elaborate on the right to remain silent? More details on that right to remain silent are provided in our book, Transformation of America. The bottom line on it is that the blood trauma was so horrible that it caused my conscious mind to take flight and left me wide open to programming. And there's a lot of knowledge pertaining to the effects of trauma on the human mind to the extent where occultism is proliferating and being used as a trauma base for mind control. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino is the founder of the Occult Temple of Set. He is with the Psychological Warfare Division, which says quite a bit.
Graduated from War College, taught there. He claims he knows me well. He's only met me on one occasion. I thought he was a donkey. I use the best words I can. My language is atrocious, and I'm really working very difficult to clean it up.
But Michael Aquino was one of my primary mind control programmers. Now, I'll be talking about that more tomorrow and how he knew that the occult blood traumas would allow for mind control programming, which is why he's got that Temple of Set that's on the military bases in the United States. He was named in the Presidio daycare scandal that Mark mentioned a minute ago pertaining to mind control of numerous children, and he too knows that with the blood trauma combined with high voltage trauma, that mind control is imminent. It's also interesting to note that Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino is not allowed in your country. He's been banned from Canada.
As a matter of fact, I worked very diligently for 2 years with your, I don't think I'm even supposed to say it in public, your CIS, which is your Canadian Intelligence Agency. We worked very difficult strings to keep Mr. Aquino out of this country. Mr. Aquino is no longer welcome at the border. If we can catch him in this country, and there are a lot of folks in intelligence, a lot of folks in your Canadian customs who are aware of it, if they can catch him coming up here for any reason, I've asked personally to be able, by your so-called Euro prisons, I forget exactly what it is, to be allowed to spend a couple of hours with Mr. Aquino alone. Now, I got one more I want to talk about. This Elizabeth Loftus thing. Elizabeth Loftus, and this is about the False Memory Foundation. It's about an organization that cropped up out of nowhere that was run by some Denmark pedophiles who were in the child pornography business, that were running around contaminating cases of sexual child abuse against children so that the abusers would walk away not only with custody of the children, but of course walk away with managing somehow to get the poor mothers or other caregivers who were plaintiffs in the case locked up for insanity reasons or whatever. This false memory syndrome is not a disorder that's recognized by the American Psychiatric or American Psychological Association. It's still in the syndrome stage. It's still not totally accepted by mental health. And until mental health realizes that there is such a thing as false memory and that we all suffer from it, and how that we can actually